So, very, very happy to be here again for another masterclass. It's wonderful to meet each of you today on a very exciting topic that is relevant, contextual, and is shifting a lot of heads, if I were to put it that way. Yes, it's that of how do we build a learning culture in organizations. The more we think about it, the more I realize it is deep. It is very relevant in the digital world that we are living today, and is forcing us to really relook at the way we learn, whether as individuals, as teams, or as organizations, and is pushing us to really look at a habit that is new, very different, and of course in the years and decades to come. So let's take a step back. If we are to build a learning organization, I think there are five levers that one needs to be considering. The first one is what I call overarch. Aspect of culture in the organization. The third is about the role of leadership in organizations. So, nothing works unless it is driven top down, and learning, so importantly, has this important element to it as well. The fourth lever is the biggest one in my mind, and that is the learning experience that we are creating for learners in organizations. So, when we think about it, what is the quality of learning we are giving? Do they have the relevant takeaway? Is it useful for the learner? And therefore, does the learner go back with an experience that is very fulfilling? That's the fourth lever to consider when we are building a learning culture. The fifth and foremost, given the fact that we are all working remote and hybrid models are here to stay, will be how are we going to really use technology to the fullest? So, be it choosing the right technology for learning, be it getting people to become more aware and adept at using technology, or aspects of artificial intelligence to enable us to provide the learner the right choices of learning, or analytics that will help us really understand, is my learner engaged, and is the learning culture shifting at all through this engagement. So in my mind, over years I've realized that these five levers, right from an overarch to the culture of learning that we are building in an organization, to the leadership support that is required to create a culture of learning, to the learning experience the learner has at the end of the day, and the technology and very effective use of it are all going to be very important in creating and building a very sustainable and scalable learning culture at the end of the day. Now, again, let's move back to the concept that we spoke just a few minutes ago, which is around leadership support, sponsorship, and the importance of leaders playing a role modeling, game in the organization, which is so important for learners to see and imbibe in terms of learning behaviors. So, the first question I would ask myself every time is, how much is my leader committed to learning on one hand or on one end of the spectrum? But more importantly, what is the vision my organization has? And what is the roadmap my leader has for this organization? That is the starting point to think about culture, to think about building an appropriate culture, to think about bringing in learning aspects that will be very useful for an organization and for the individual. The second aspect to consider will be, what are the efforts we are making to understand the capability that needs to be built in organizations? based on the vision and the roadmap that my leader has. So, when we are clear about the roadmap, when we are clear about the capability requirements, obviously the third element, which is around what is the careers that we can provide in this organization, given that the world is shifting. Let's really come to the world of today. We are working remote, there is a hybrid model, newer roles are emerging in every organization. Even a couple of years back, if we were to think of it, did we really think we will work remote? The answer is no. Did we really think social learning will be so important? Did we think we will learn sitting in remote places around the globe? The answer was no, right? So today my thought is revolving around, so, given that we know the roadmap and the capability, what are we really doing as leaders to understand the new careers that are coming up? And for those careers, how is it that we are building capability? Are we even giving a thought to the third element, which is careers? The fourth one, of course, is while all this is there, what is the investment a leader needs to be making to upskill or cross skill the workforce to prepare them for a workplace of tomorrow, of the future? And unless these four elements are all put together or they come together in a very synchronous manner, building a learning culture is going to be extremely challenging. The last one is, we all learn and emulate our leaders all through our careers. Each one of us have experienced that we learn from the right leaders. We learn from how our leaders behave, and learning is also a learning. So essentially, when you look at it, how does the leader exhibit learning? What is the learning environment that I am exposed to because of my leader? Is there a recognition or a motivation that is happening when I deliver or learn something myself? What is the ecosystem? How am I motivated to learn in this organization? And all those questions in terms of leader behaviors to promote a learning culture which encourages employees to learn from leaders. All of those become very critical when it comes to creating a learning culture. So, not only an overarch that we saw in organizations, but we also see the need for leaders to be effective sponsors, effective champions of learning, day in and day out. Moving to the third aspect, I think, which is more the aspect around power, influence, and the power of networks, as I can see. Culture. However, the most important one in my mind. And when I say that, and why do I say that? So, all organizations we know are made of people, and we have formal and informal networks, right? Now, with formal and informal networks also come formal and informal relationships. An organization that is focused to building a learning culture will understand how to powerfully use these relationships and networks to get the best for the learning culture that should and must become aspirational within and outside the organization. So the second part of it will be, especially if you're part of knowledge organizations, then the power of networks, the power of remote networks today is becoming increasingly important while building a culture. The third one is not only being able to understand your network or the influence required to push the networks to propagate a learning culture, it's also important to start connecting the dots of how to use these networks as influencers to both strategically achieve the learning culture that we are aspiring to, and also achieve the operational learning culture that we need to have in every organization. This brings me to a completely different aspect around how are we using peer networks to talk about what learning is happening in the organization, to talk about the influence learning has had in their work experience day to day, to propagate learning between each other and learning from each other, which also adds to a different flavor to the culture that we are building towards learning in every organization. That also brings me to another aspect, which is I don't know how many of us really understand or know that these networks play a very important role when it comes to leveraging the power to change. Because change, as all of us know, learning and habits are part of change, right? There is some change that happens in us which leads us to doing some action repeatedly and with consistency such that it becomes a habit. Now imagine thousands of learners, thousands of employees in organizations or in workplaces changing one habit at a time towards learning, and the impact it's going to have across the organization when it comes to the large scale transformation or the large scale change that is required to build a learning culture. So here again, networks play a very significant role. And I think we should never underestimate the power of words or the word of mouth conversations that happen around learning, around how organizations are recognizing learners or the ecosystem that the organization is providing for learning. And that is again a very very big, I would say, not only a checkbox but a must have checkbox when we are trying to create a learning culture in organizations. So while we are looking at overarching prominence given to learning in organizations, to how leaders are supporting, encouraging and acting as role models for learning behaviors to get imbibed by learners, we should not underestimate the power of influence through peer learning, social learning, and the influence networks have, both formal and informal, while propagating a learning culture in organizations. Now that brings me to the bigger question of, yes, there is a learning transformation. Yes, there is a digital learning culture that we are trying to build in the world of today and probably for the world of future. But where do we start at all? How do we start the story of transformation in organizations? And there, the first question to ask is, which is the first function that needs to adopt to this? Who will be my early movers and whose impact will have the biggest, or whose adoption will have the biggest in organization, is the first question that probably I would start with. Once that is defined, or once I understand the impact of a particular function and how it can really steer my change in terms of building a learning culture, the question to then to be asked will be, are people even aware of what a learning culture is about? Are people aware of a digital learning culture in the experiences that we are all going through today, especially post COVID, right? So are people aware, and how do I create awareness for the learning journey to begin individually, as teams, as business units, and at the end of it all, as an organization? Now, is it enough if we are going to kind of ensure that we create enough awareness about learning and the adoption of learning towards building a learning culture? The answer will be no, and it has to go through a deep dive of, are people aware of the skills they need to be learning and the know-how of how to integrate these skills and effectively apply them at work? That will be the most crucial part, right? So how do you create stickiness for learning such that every learner is enthused to come back to the learning space, to the learning field, to the learning drawing board, unlearn, learn and relearn, and everybody's effort, every single employee's effort goes a long way in ensuring that that's the way the organization does work, or learning is a way of doing things in organizations. And we know that the most beautiful organizations have learning embedded in one form or the other, and they encourage learners in to learn in the work, in the flow of work, right? So as you work, what are the experiences you have, and how are you putting those experiences back to somebody else's learning, and how are you creating that beautiful circle of learning for each other, such that over time culture of learning becomes very prevalent, and culture of learning becomes deeply embedded in organizations. The other aspect to consider is, how real is this learning? For example, are you going to give your employees esoteric learning? And when esoteric learning happens, then the question is, how is this even relevant to what I can do with it? Or once I get back to my desk, is there an opportunity for me to really apply what I'm learning? So the question for creating powerful learning cultures should be, is the learning designed in such a way such that it is absolutely real to the learner, and he's able to actually practically go back with takeaways and apply it back at the workplace? What is the consistent and continuous experience we are able to give a learner? Because that matters a lot, right? So when I come to a digital learning system, or when I come to a learning forum, earlier which used to be classrooms, and today you have the digital experiences, including augmented reality and virtual reality that we are seeing. The question is, what is the experience I'm getting out of it? Is it continuous and is it consistent? Because learning has to be a promise at the end of the day. It is a brand in its own way, right? I mean, many organizations are known for creating those powerful learning experiences for people, that learning as a culture is imbibed by the new employee when he or she joins. And till the person exits the organization, learning is closely tied to the individual's flow of work. So, what is the continuous learning we are providing? And what is the consistency of learning experience that a learner gets when he or she comes or has a need for learning? And, much research has shown that recency is very closely tied to retention. When I say retention, it's knowledge retention, right? So the question will be, any learning design that we create, is it nurturing a spirit of learning? Is it providing answers just in time for an individual who is living in an era where there is a continuous short supply of time? And given this scenario, are we able to create learning nuggets that help learners to come back for? And the minute you bring in that stickiness, automatically there is a culture of learning that is seeping in, even without us realizing. And that goes a long way in building the culture of learning in organizations. So, gone are the days when we would probably have lots of people coming into a classroom. And I remember it very fondly, simply because learning in classrooms has a beauty of its own. The connect that you can make, the interaction that you can have with your peer colleagues. However, we are getting into a very beautiful era of social learning. It's got no barriers, right? I mean, you can learn through cohorts that are global. You are learning interculturally. At the same time, you're learning what you want to learn, and the results are plenty. How much you take it, how much you take, how much you're focused on that learning, has a very different brings in a different perspective to learning itself. So given that we are racing to digital learning, and where peers are there from all over the globe, from all over the country, from all over different locations, the supplementing and complementing skills that the cohort brings in a virtual class is so beautiful. Likewise, online learning. I think we are in a paradigm of choice today, right? We have so many to choose from, and the paradigm of choice obviously has led us to also start thinking about artificial intelligence as a technology to make our decisions simpler. So with the plenty of choices, with the plethora of choices you have, the whole point is, how are we really, getting to the space? How are we really getting to a place where all of this is becoming interconnected and social learning is becoming the order of tomorrow? So multiple aspects that we reflected, and the insights that I have gained over the years in the learning space is really fascinating to see how learning was a simple straight jacketed, I tell you and you listen, to becoming a two-way dialogue over time. And today it's a global dialogue that is happening in the learning world. And once you put all these nuances together of technology, of people experience, of leaders as role models, of creating an ecosystem of recognition for learners, I think culture is the natural outcome, that I see, will be the end result of all the efforts that go there. To summarize and to kind of come to the most important part, how easy is it to create a learning culture? Organizations have battled this. Organizations have revamped their thought processes. They have innovated approaches to learning, from what used to be a 3 hour or a 5 day kind of learning. Today we have come to what we call micro nuggets of learning, right? 5 minute coaching, in demand coaching, on demand learning, and it is endless. The plethora of choices, again, whether it is learning technique, whether it is learning behavioral skills, whether it is behavior leadership behaviors that one needs to focus on, the choice is immense, right? And what is the recipe for success really for anybody who is setting out to create a culture of learning? I think there are 5 levers yet again. Clutter. The brain is able to only accept anything that is very simple, whether it is the design of the learning, whether it is what I see, my user experience and user interface, what I see when I'm learning. It does not like clutter. It does not like too many things popping out. So, how simple are we keeping the design, the learning architecture, the learning courses? How simple are the takeaways for me? All of that matter. So the first element to build a very effective learning culture would be to see, are we cluttering people with so much that they don't want to learn, or can I make it very simple for them? Second is, how are we focusing on learner centricity? So whenever we choose technology, whenever you choose a learning platform, whenever you choose designs for the learning courses as you're architecting it as a, and the roles, learning experts are playing today are that of learning architects, right? I mean, you architect not only the course, but you're architecting the technology, the way it is getting organized, how AI is able to push it for you, the data points you're able to get to engage, all of these, right? Second aspect to build a very effective learning culture, in my mind, will be, how learner centric are you? Do you really have a product focus when you're looking at learning? Are you able to put yourself in the shoes of the learner and understand the challenges and make it easy in terms of experience for the individual? Third is, you can do anything, but if the person or the employee is not even aware that courses exist, a learning management system exists, or there are opportunities for learning, then where is the learning culture going to get built? And this is the biggest insight I have had over years, that communication is a very critical and important thing in the learning space. So not only are you architects for creating a learning culture, being learning specialists, you also have an onus and responsibility to organize communication in such a way that it attracts the audience. You're able to create a natural pull to whatever you are creating in terms of the organization. So the third lever or lever for success will be, what is the awareness and how are you using communication to channelize thoughts, ideas, and
pulling people to the learning space that you want them to be, whether it is online learning, whether it is peer learning, whether it is social cohorts that you're creating, whether it is focus groups, whatever you're doing. How are you communicating that to the end user? I would say again, the role of leadership in this is very important. And why? We have seen in many organizations, I've experienced, wherever the leader is committed to learning, where the leader calls out to learning, where the leader himself or herself takes part in the learning that is being evangelized, those behaviors are adopted very, very easily by the learners, right? So the whole concept of why we are stressing so much on leaders being brand ambassadors for creating a learning culture is very simple. All eyes are on the leader, and if the leader cracks this learning piece in terms of talking about it in forums, encouraging people to learn, voicing, giving a voice to learning, and acting as a very powerful sponsor, that is the easiest way to kind of create learning culture in organizations, in my experience. And finally, it's about engaging the audience. So all said and done, you can have the best technology, you can have the best leaders, you can have the best of the courses, you can have the best of the design, you have a very decluttered space when it comes to learning, there is time and opportunity provided to learners. All said and done, if the learner is not engaged, and that learning engagement comes from a combination of all these factors. So if the learner is not engaged, or if you're not able to, as a learning architect, understand whether a learner is learning, what is it that interests him or her, what are the pieces that needs to be pushed for gently nudging the habit of learning for a particular individual who is not coming to your portal, or who is not even going to the mobile that is so accessible to learning, how are you really going to get engagement out of a learner? How are you monitoring it? How are you analyzing the data that comes to you over time? And how are you going to steer the learning powerfully to create engagement in learners? So, if you look at the 5 aspects for learning, which together act as a recipe for creating successful learning cultures in organizations, I think I start with decluttering, keeping everything very simple for the learner. Second is use the learner eyes. What is it that a learner wants? That's the second aspect of it. The third is absolutely make sure that the leadership is involved, either as sponsors, role models in the whole process of creating a learning culture. The fourth is make sure you're using communication very powerfully to kind of push awareness in the learners and among the learners. And fifth, make sure that you are really engaging the audience by understanding the different nuggets that go together and holistically help in creating a learning culture. And I think it was a beautiful experience for me to reflect on my own journey in the learning space over the years, and put all these together for you today. And I truly hope that this was insightful and will be useful for each of you in creating your own learning cultures in organizations. Thank you so much.